Meet Scott Hagwood, four-time winner of the Memory Championships. In this test, Scott is given 1 minute to study the shuffled cards. After handing over the deck, Scott's given another and asked to order it in the identical sequence as the first one.
2 of spades, 3 of diamonds.
The 2 stacks match, the sign of a memory champion. Incredibly, Scott Hagwood had a horrible memory until he began studying how the brain remembers. He transformed himself from an average Joe to a brainiac. MRI studies of Scott's brain show that he can access his memory bank without activating other areas of the brain that would normally interfere.
What this is telling us is that you're using these areas of your brain much more efficiently.
He maintains that he's no different than anyone else. He's merely mastered a basic technique to help him remember and recall more easily.
When I'll use kind of like a journey method, and what I'll do is when I look at the word, I'll try to find some kind of visualization.
Scott associates memory with mental images. Names and faces are no problem, but where he really shines is in memorizing long number sequences. Next, Scott is asked to memorize a random bank of 160 numbers. That's like trying to remember 16 different 10-digit phone numbers after seeing them just once. In 7 minutes, he's ready to recite the list in exact order.
9, 4, 2, 1, 3, 8, 6, 7, 3, 5, 2, 4, 8. The last 4 should be 7, 3, 2, 0.
Ever wished you had a bigger and better brain? Becoming a London cab driver might do the trick. Scientists at University College in London scanned the heads of cab drivers and found that their brains actually get larger and more efficient the longer they're on the job. The growth occurred in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, where navigational memory is stored. The revolutionary study was the first to prove that the mind can undergo positive structural changes.
You can actually train the brain to function better. It's just like an athlete. To stay in form, you gotta work out your brain to keep the brain in shape.
The increase may be due to the massive amount of street memorization the drivers do to complete their rigorous training. London cabbies must go through a tough 3-year training program called the Knowledge. They've got to know 400 different routes to graduate. All this has sparked the interest of scientists around the world. They're researching if similar training programs might help rehabilitate people with brain damage. For decades, Dr. Herbert Benson of the Harvard Mind-Body Medical Institute has studied Tibetan monks during their meditation practice of Tummo, the yoga of inner heat. Incredibly, it only takes 2 hours for these monks to dry bed sheets soaked in cold water using only the power of their minds.
These monks, astoundingly, in simple meditation, could increase their temperature enough to get the sheets steaming and dry the sheets. You and I would go into uncontrollable shivering and perhaps even die.
Somehow, the monks managed to shift warm blood from their body's core out to the skin, using just the power of their minds. As the monks breathe, they picture the air as a kind of energy, a flame or fire coming through their chest.
To make things interesting, psychologist Vivian Hill has chosen sections from some of the most difficult IQ tests. Section 1 is a test of abstract reasoning. Try looking at this set of patterns and decide what they have in common. And then choose which of the extra shapes matches those patterns. In this simple example, it's obvious, but it can get fiendishly difficult.
It's very pure reasoning. It's the ability to look at information and to try to deduce a rule that makes connections.
The major move I've made in the study of intelligence is to pluralize it. I've come up with an alternative view, which is called multiple intelligence theory, to perform some kind of an action in the area of music or in the area of navigation is very different than to perform in a scholastic kind of assignment. And my whole analysis over many years suggests it's a mistake. It's a category error to lump all these together and to call them intelligence.
Professor Gardner is convinced we have at least 8 relatively separate intelligences. This is completely opposite to the IQ, which assumes that we all have just one general intelligence.
So you might be wonderful at understanding other people, but a disaster at doing crossword puzzles or at flying an airplane. So we do know that in individuals, high performance in one area simply doesn't predict high performance in other areas.
On the contrary, our brain is pliable, plastic, and changeable throughout our lifespan, regardless of our age or genetics.
Plasticity is a two-way street. It's easy to degrade your brain.
Plasticity gives rise to flexible behaviors, but sometimes if we use our plasticity in a certain way, it actually gives rise to rigidities. The way to think about this is that the brain's plasticity is like snow on a hill in winter. It's because the snow is pliable, you can take many different paths down that hill. If you enjoy that path down the hill, you'll tend to favor that path on subsequent runs. Each time you go down that same run, you'll develop a track. And if you keep going down that track, it becomes a rut. Now, this is the way brain plasticity functions, actually. If you keep doing something, our very plastic brains can give rise to a rigid behavior.
Negative plasticity can sometimes result in mental disorders as well.
Thinking about your thoughts differently acted back on the worry circuit to quiet it in a therapeutic way, with the result that these OCD patients really were able to shed their illness. They were no longer beset by these burdensome, compulsive, worrying thoughts to the same extent that the medication did. This was a very early indication that the mind can act back on the brain, that the thoughts you think have a physical, measurable effect on the activity of a particular brain circuit.
Just as when you want to improve your cardiovascular health, you have to push yourself. You have to really push yourself cognitively and pay very, very close attention just to increase your cognitive ability. And reading the paper won't do it. And doing the things that you like, dancing the old dances won't do it. But dancing new dances where you have to strain to learn the steps will do it.
When something occurs that really engages our emotions, that really engages us powerfully, we know it's important. We never forget it, right? And it's because the brain basically is saying, save that one. The brain is deciding what to record. It's deciding what changes to enable, to strengthen.
It's important to understand that it's not just dramatic things that cause your brain to change its structure and its function. It's things that you're doing all the time. If you are watching this television show, you're changing your brain to some degree. But if you do something over and over again and you increase it incrementally, that's how you get major brain change that's more lasting.
Tenet number 5, brain plasticity is a two-way street, and we can either drive brain change positively or negatively.
Overall, the discovery of brain plasticity is very uplifting. But our plasticity also gets us into all sorts of difficulties as well. There are a number of disorders we've now discovered that, in fact, are explained in terms of plasticity. Some of the chronic pain syndromes are actually based on the plastic brain becoming very, very good at firing the pain signal. That would be one example. Virtually every bad habit we ever develop is actually a product of our brain plasticity. Our brain just gets very, very good at the bad habit, and it becomes very, very hard to shake. So once we discover that the brain is plastic, it means two things: that we have the power to change our brains much more than we ever believed. It's more malleable. But a malleable brain is also a vulnerable brain. And if you keep in mind that everything we do and everything we're bombarded with in a sensory way also is changing our brains, we realize that we're much more easily altered by the environment than we ever imagined.
Tenet number 6, memory is crucial for learning.